Hey, Carl, finished episode 233. Interesting episode. You've got lots on your plate, lots and lots of games. That's great. I hope it continues on. Good luck with the YouTube channel, and I'll be around. So take care. I look forward to interacting with you in 2024.
Carl Rodriguez is the GMologist, GM extraordinaire, the GMologist.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Geomologist Presents. Real quick intro for you. That was Jason at the top of the show from Nerds RPG Variety Cast. Thanks, Jason, for that New Year's message. I do have a lot on my plate. I want to increase my presence, branding, I don't know, whatever it's called on the social medias, but we're really having fun doing Actual Play YouTube. I have my, co-host, partner in crime, my wife, Amy, is helping out with that, producing it, monitoring all the stuffs that you monitor for that. And I've had great guests on there as well. So I plan to continue to have guests, maybe other guest GMs, and we'll see how that goes. The podcast will continue. I'm going to try to have more of a regular schedule, probably Fridays for the main podcast. And Amy and I have discussed movie review type of podcast. Probably be shorter, maybe half an hour at the most. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be that long. Sometimes we might have a guest depending on the movie, and I think it should be fun. So thanks, Jason, for the inspiration to do that. Makes me kind of motivated to do a little bit of my own thing. Still listen to the movie night that people have been putting on the Audio Dungeon Discord. But yeah, just do westerns, and we thought westerns and probably war movies. I think that might be kind of fun. So with regards to the podcast, if I only do one a week, I don't know if that'll make them longer. We'll try to see. I kind of want to divide podcast between content and recap, or maybe recap and recall, or recap and feedback. And then from the other one will be some sort of content, maybe an interview or something like that, and rotate those around. But at least one a week, unless I get crazy and have more than one a week as schedule permits. But at least one a week of the regular podcast. It'll still be numbered in sequential order. It won't be like 234 and 234A. But no. So today's show, I have my buddy BJ from the Arcane Alias come up, and we're going to talk about what motivates PCs. It's been inspired by a number of podcasts. I put those in the show notes, and we talk about them. So I got a call from Jason Connerly first, and then after that, on to the thing with BJ, the discussion with BJ. Okay, so I'll be right back after Jason's quick message, and then we'll jump into the discussion.
Hey, Carl, Jason here. Happy New Year. I had meant to call in for your beer tour at the end of the year because you mentioned Waco, Texas, and the Texas Ranger Museum is in Waco, Texas. And the Texas Ranger Museum is well worth your time to stop at. Of course, the other thing that St. Nicholas is famous for is punching the heretic Arius at the Council of Nicaea.
Hey, Jason, when we fly through Waco on our way up or on our way back, on our way up, we never really stop. We just want to get to Dallas usually. But on our way back, we usually stop at a brewery. We have stopped at the Mammoth Dig Site, which is kind of cool. It's a really fun tour. They show you where they're actually digging and stuff like that in a enclosed, protected environment, or protected from the elements at least. And it's an active dig. It's pretty neat. And we have been meaning to go to the Ranger Museum. I don't know, not at the top of our itinerary. Maybe it should be. We did learn that it is open daily from 9 to 5, so we could hit it on a Sunday on the way back. But that does sound pretty cool. And if you notice, today's cover art is a meme about the thing that you said. Well, I'll try to track down the artist and put that in the show notes. If I cannot, well, it's a very common meme that's been passed around, or I saw it on Pinterest. So anyway, thanks for that. As a kind of fun little anecdote about St. Nick. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the GMologist Presents. I have my buddy BJ Boyd here with the dogs in the background.
I can't get away from the dog. Whenever we try to do something, the dog is barking.
He wants to participate. She wants to participate.
That's a special shout out to Jason Connerly's dogs.
Yeah. Well, they're trying to communicate with Jason Connerly's dogs potentially. Anyway, Happy New Year, everyone. I'm here with BJ Boyd of the Arcane Alienist, and we're going to talk about what motivates you, the player, to adventure. Now, granted, this might be a sort of a GM leaning discussion, but we both play as well. And the origin of this discussion, this ongoing debate on Nerds RPG Variety Cast, also countered by Jason Connerly, also countered by the Worlds of M.W. Lewis podcast, with also rebuttals by the Bandits Keep podcast by Daniel Norton. So and BJ has been a little vocal on that subject here and there on the Nerds RPG Variety Cast and on the Audio Dungeon Discord. So how are you doing, BJ? How did you get into this contentious conversation?
I don't know if it's really been contentious. It's certainly been people having different opinions. I think how I got into this was just responding to something Jason had thrown out a few weeks ago about, is the gold standard really useful the way it's set up in by default in Dungeons and Dragons? And I think part of the criticism has been it's not historically accurate, which I think you always have to be careful with D&D about, or how much are we trying to actually emulate medieval Europe versus how much is that just a veneer to make it a fantasy game, because it's also a game with, zombies and dragons and elves and wizards, which aren't historically accurate either, at least not that they actually existed. I mean, people back then believed that some of those things existed, obviously, but I think one thing to keep in mind, I think I always point out, is I think several of us have pointed out, is that bog standard Dungeons and Dragons is really a Western with a medieval fantasy veneer. It's much more like you would expect in a Western movie, where you've got people who are free to move about. You can't do that in medieval Europe unless you're a noble or a certain person. You can't just leave the farm if you're a peasant, because you're that you owe to your landlord.
Right.
Anyway, so just trying to compare D&D, socioeconomic to actual medieval Europe is probably not fruitful. I think the default thing is just, hey, that's not historically accurate. It's a game. Just enjoy it for what it is. At this point, D&D is its own genre, right?
Right. And then in early D&D, in a basic expert, and then in AD&D first edition, gold, and I guess in second edition too, I believe gold is used as XP.
Right.
So that is kind of a motivating factor to accumulate gold, hence the pseudo gold standard, in order to advance your character.
Right. And so I think it starts though with the question of, if you were going to use some sort of currency standard, why would you not use silver or copper or something else? And of course, I think if you're talking about most of your characters are not nobles, I think a lot of, I could be wrong, and someone who knows more about actual medieval history can correct me on this, but I think a lot of peasants would have survived by bartering for things as much as they did for, exchanging coin. But again, it's just, are we playing a game about accounting, or are we playing a game about adventuring, right? Although when we start talking about domain play, yes, we are playing a game about accounting to a certain extent. So I think that's where it started was, and I think the general conclusion is, if you just want something that is functional for the game, the way the gold, silver, copper set up for D&D is great. And if you want to tweak it as a DM for your campaign, that's good, but it gives you something that just works if that's not something you want to mess with just right out of the book.
Yeah, I think if you wanted to do proper economy, you could go, we're going to talk mainly about D&D. We'll jump into other games too. But if you wanted like a proper medieval economy, you could look to a game like Harn World, Harn Master, where it is a silver standard. Gold is very rare. But then again, XP and power. I mean, power, sure, wealth equals power, can be gold driven, or you find a big cache of dwarven gold, right? Then you're
Yeah.
set for life. But it's a silver standard. Generally, silver is
Yeah.
more, and I think it's gold really, because there's no song called "The Ecstasy of Silver." It's called "The Ecstasy of Gold" from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. You know,
Yeah.
Yukon Cornelius goes silver and gold, not gold and silver. You know, so
Yeah.
it's gold seems like have a more of a lore than silver.
Yeah.
I guess there's an anecdote in the military where you have like the silver bars are higher than gold bars because silver is harder to mine, which is potentially true. I don't know. I don't know if there's any metallurgists out there. Maybe they know that, or not geologists out there. But gold to our society is more valued. And that's probably why the emphasis on a fantasy game is gold, right? I think.
Right.
I mean, and it's to me, it's no big deal because it's not medieval history. You're not trying, and if you really wanted to, you just change it up and make silver the standard if it really bothers you, and then silver being the XP point, right?
So if you look at like BX and all the sort of various retro clones and variations of BX that have come out, I think the one that jumps out to me is Lamentations of the Flame Princess. I think that they just switch it to the silver standard. You can literally do that in any D&D game you want. You just, wherever it says gold piece, that's now silver piece. Wherever it says silver piece, that's now copper piece. And I guess wherever something is denoted in copper, you just multiply it by 10.
Right. And even in D&D, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, in D&D 5e and Pathfinder 2e, it's kind of silver is more prevalent. Gold is not as common. So but they kind of lower the cost of a lot of things.
Yeah, right? And it's not just in the treasure hoards, but in the costs of things, you would lower it so that wherever the book says something costs 5 gold, now it costs 5 silver. And when you do that, then it's like, well, hey, this is a fantasy world. It doesn't have to work like ours. Why put out the effort when you could just say, yeah, gold is plenty enough in this world that it's common currency.
Yeah, and if you want more realism, then you go to like Lamentations. I guess it's realism, but with witches and demons and devils and dragons, etc. Or like Warhammer Fantasy, which is also silver standard. Gold is hard to come by. So it's different strokes for different folks.
If you look at Knave, where the idea behind Knave is you're supposed to be sort of desperate, dirty, filthy treasure hunters.
Much like Warhammer Fantasy starting out,
everything's on a copper standard.
Oh, yeah. Brass pennies are easy to find, yes.
Just to reflect the fact that the reason you're out risking your life looking for treasure is because there's no money,
Yeah,
true.
Like
with coppers.
In Warhammer Fantasy, there's some people who would never see a gold piece, right?
Yeah. So
even player character careers. Right?
Yeah. So what I had suggested to Jason was an idea that I had that I've never implemented. But I was running a Old School Essentials campaign, and no one really seemed interested in domain play.
Okay.
Because they were still coming in from sort of a modern D&D sort of, we're just kind of itinerant adventurers.
Yeah.
I just need money for the, for the inn and to upgrade my equipment. And this idea of socking it away for domain play I don't think it was really interesting to anybody. So then you've got adventurers. It's like, well, at this point it's an encumbrance issue. You can't carry that much gold, and you can't carry that much platinum. You can't carry that many gems.
I put it in the bank.
Put it in the bank, and then you're like, well, did they have banks? And again, is this historic?
Yeah. So that becomes a problem, right? This debate about PCs accumulating too much gold. Yeah. And I know in the earlier games, go ahead.
So my solution that I never implemented was to just divide everything by 10, go to a silver standard, and then you get an XP for a silver piece instead of a gold piece. So it doesn't slow down the rate of leveling. It's just, it makes more sense that you're not walking around with enough money in your pocket to, buy a kingdom.
But then you just accumulate silver pieces.
Right. But and then the idea is your common everyday equipment like food, lodging, swords, armor. That's the silver. When you look at what's listed in Old School Essentials or BX, if you want to build a castle, or buy a ship or do something like that, that state remains at the gold standard. So
Mhm.
those are still things that only very wealthy people are going to be able to accumulate. But your adventures are just getting 10% of what they would normally be getting if you were just doing it by the book.
Right.
And so they can continue to level, though. We just switched to a silver standard for XP. Again, it was a kind of a whiteboard idea that I never really got a chance to implement, because we weren't going to. It never really got to be that big of a problem. But it was something I thought about, and that's what I'd suggest when I called in Jason. If people, the only reason I've ever thought about abandoning the gold standard from a practical thing was that it was to help shape the campaign to be a little more matching what the players were kind of wanting to play for when they weren't interested in domain play.
Yeah. So well, I guess we'll get to it, but we should hold that thought, because then we can get back to like the motivation of that type of player. But I know like AD&D, you do have this, and BX, I guess you do have this accumulation of a bunch of gold, but then there's rules to take away that gold. That's why I think AD&D is, it's still a solid product. I know you have to read through the High Gygaxian and hit some of its cheekiness, but I mean, that aside, I mean, I still can pick up the book. I'm like, oh, that's so cool that they covered that, right? So there's rules to take away gold from training, and then when you get high enough level, you want to build castles, and that's ridiculous, and you got to pay all the people. And then if there really is, there are rules for, like, simple, no income tax with your 10W40 form, with all the deductions, but there is, at least you can have like a percentage as tax, if you really wanted to implement that.
Well, and those are good role-playing opportunities where, I mean, if you think about, and I'll shamelessly say that this is not my original thought. I'm quoting or paraphrasing Jim Davis of the WebDM YouTube channel and podcast, where he talks about, you come back to town and you start throwing gold around, buying fancier clothes and a better room at the inn and better food and buying drinks for everybody and purchasing new equipment. Whoever is in charge there, the Lord Mayor, the Duke, the Baron, somebody is going to take notice, and pretty soon somebody's going to be going, hey, where'd you get all that money? I think you owe us some taxes.
Right. Yeah.
And it becomes a role-playing opportunity about how honest you're going to be, but at least the setting in the game is acknowledging, that didn't just, everybody didn't just go, oh, well, you lucky SOB, good for you. What's that scene in when he gets his first paycheck in Raising Arizona?
All right.
He looks at it.
Yeah.
The government do take a bite, don't she?
Yep. Well, that's interesting. So again, it's depending on the type of style of game you want to run. If you want to run something where there's a living economy and these nobles, etc., have to make their money. So you go, like, again, I'll just use Hornworld for an example. They list like portage fees, they list like taxes and tolls, right? That they accumulate, and this would be like your equivalent of sales tax, right? You could implement like a sales tax, but I think you couldn't like surprise the players with that. You're going to say, look, this is going to happen, so don't think you're being fleeced. This is standard procedure when you're coming into a city and you're going through the gate. There's a toll based on the axle of the amount of on the cart that you have, or just like there's tolls on the road for 18-wheelers, right? Or there's a toll per head. And some games have that already, so they kind of, people know the verse. Like Warhammer Fantasy, you go into a city and they're like, okay, there's a head tax, right? You go, or although some taxes, right, become like, that's kind of weird. Why is there more of a tax on a dwarf or a wizard? And then that becomes like a mystery that the players have to solve. So you can even do that too. Oh, this is not standard. Everyone pays like a copper piece to come in, but oh, look, you're a different species and we're going to tax you more or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
I think that's interesting to do. My thoughts on that are, that's interesting to do if it leads to role-playing situations,
an adventure,
and adventure, or it becomes a challenge to the players of how do we skirt around that?
Yes.
Can we bluff our way past? Do we sneak in? It becomes a challenge. If it's just something that you're going to do and you got to stop the game for 5 minutes to write out a ledger and calculate and give somebody, hand somebody their receipt, and there's no role playing, there's no adventure. It's just a way to suck the money away from them. I would just say cut the treasure hoard and don't mess with that.
True. Yeah, and then
because that's kind of boring to do all that unless you got a player who wants they want to keep track of all that because that's kind of their job. Okay, whenever we go to this town, here's the budget for that because it becomes a role playing challenge. You might hand wave it after you've done it a couple of times and they've mastered that and it's not fun anymore. But
yeah, or just to set the tone, right?
Yeah,
type of thing. Or even like you said, to make it like a portal to adventure. They're like, I'm sick of paying these fees. How do we get around it? And then they meet the smugglers, right, in the town or whatever, right? So something like that. Yeah, and even the training thing. I know people have gotten debate about the training thing, but the way I feel, and I think I made a call in either to Jason or to MW, you could do the training as guild dues. There's guild dues throughout medieval history, and you have to pay in order to advance, from journeyman to from apprentice to journeyman to master, for example. So then you just do that with especially since like AD&D and BX beautifully have titles for all the levels, so that these are established professions in the Adventurers Guild, and then you just charge. Right. And it becomes guild dues in order to be sanctioned. Now, you don't have to do that necessarily, but then you could become labeled a bandit, and then you can't, or an outlaw, and people, you'd have to establish that again ahead of time. You can't surprise the characters with that kind of stuff. You got to let them know this is the way the world works. But
that's also a solution to the murder hobo thing of, say you got a wizard who's just a rogue, not a class rogue. He's a wizard. He's gone rogue. He's, 8th or 9th level, or even just 4th or 5th level, powerful enough to survive on their own, to be able to kind of just do whatever they want. And he goes murder hobo. Probably the first people that are going to go after him is some sort of society of wizards, because they're like, hey, if this guy's running around the countryside using arcane magic to terrorize people, we're powerful, but they'll still burn us at the stake. If you get enough peasants with pitchforks and torches and enough fighters and knights leading them, or the clerics will come after us. The church will come after us. Or if you've got some cleric who's kind of, maybe if they're a heretic, but they're not hurting anybody, they're just a heretic. But if they're actually causing trouble because they've gone murder hobo, now their religious order is going to come after them.
Yeah.
Or the Fighters Guild is going to say that, hey man, he's not representing, our martial school well. We're going to have to take him down.
Right. Yeah. Again, they're branded an outlaw, and then you make it an adventure,
right?
Or as opposed to griefing the characters, right? The consequences of their actions. Sure, they have agency, but the consequences of their action. So I think a lot of this kind of has led into the idea of domain play. So that could also be another motivation, for players, because at some point, right, you accumulate so much wealth that what's the point? I think that's another issue potentially.
And as I think a way it's faded away, we'll probably talk more about ways that it's sort of, I don't know if it's a chicken and egg thing, but in old school D&D, even in AD&D, I think 2nd edition maybe where you started to go away from this. The game is sort of built that you don't need hirelings and henchmen when you go on an adventure. You might need them to mind your home base of operations or to, tend the camp. But the idea of having to have men-at-arms to go into the dungeon with you or to we get away from that. Well, that used to be a way to something to spend your gold on. We get away from that. So we have to beef up the characters so that they don't need, so that 5 or 6 player characters don't need to supplement themselves with another 4 or 5 men-at-arms to survive, an adventure. Well, now that's gold that would have been spent on that, with a salary and equipping and arming your men-at-arms. Now that's just more gold that's still sitting there in their pockets. What are you going to do with this?
Yeah. Or also I know, say a 3 I feel like 2nd edition also, because I'm just thinking of when I played 2nd edition 3.5, right? You accumulate the wealth and you start buying, there's magic shops on every corner. type of
Yeah,
syndrome, and you
third
start
third
buying.
edition did that, and that
Yeah,
sort of went against. That was sort of, I think, one of the breaking points for a lot of grognards was you sort of, now you've made Magic a commodity and not something
right.
mysterious and fantastic.
Yep. Like
When,
yeah,
when players are creating their shopping list and they know exactly how much gold, and the party wizard knows exactly the resources and the feats they got to take to,
mhm.
it's become a little bit of a,
Well, I say second edition too, because then players be like, "Oh, I saw here in Volo's guide that this shop on this street sells all this stuff. I want to go
yeah,
there." Right. So
yeah,
and that's second edition era. So
yeah.
it it just is the way the game has, I guess, evolved and developed. From BX and AD&D, I would say hirelings, right? So you could survive, or even just to have around to, from a meta game point of view, to
Yeah.
absorb damage when you're fighting something tough or big or a lot of it, right?
And you can run a fight. Say you've got a party and they randomly encounter a band of orcs or gnolls or somebody who's coming back from a raid,
Mhm.
and you've got 5 or 6 players, and then they've got each one of them has a man at arms or a henchman they've hired.
Mhm.
It's with them. That's 12 people on the side of the party, and you got 20 gnolls. That fight still goes very fast once you kind of roll initiative and get going, rocking and rolling.
Yeah, true.
And it's over in a few minutes.
Right.
If you tried to do that with kind of current D&D or Pathfinder, you're looking at like 2 hours, depending on how high level they are.
Right.
And so there's also that disincentive of adding. You don't want to add NPCs to the party because it just slows down every encounter. I know when back one of the last 3.5 campaigns I ran, somebody was playing a summoner, and we teased him, because he's our friend. But people were getting irritated because his whole shtick was to keep adding summon things to the battlefield, which would just cause the fights to just go out. Because on his turn, his turn would become like 5 or 6 turns within and of itself. Okay,
Right.
well, what does your familiar do? Well, what does the elemental you summon do? Well, what is the
infamous Lantern Archon spam in
yeah
3.5 and Pathfinder 1E. And then we had a player. I know you guys love anecdotes, so we had a player that would summon like 16 Lantern Archons, and then roll each of their 4 attacks individually. And to add more annoyance to the injury already caused by that, he would use one of those big dice. Bam, bam. And I know one of my current I don't one of my current players is like, "Oh man, remember that guy?" And I know this one player at the table said, "Why don't you just grab a handful of dice and just roll it all together?" And he would say, "Well, the odds are more favorable if I roll one at a time." I don't know, just his. But I guess the lesson learned, not the lesson, the take home message here is that it seems like as the game progressed through the editions, and you had less of the domain stuff, less of the hirelings, henchmen kind of play, this idea of creating a war band, and more it's just the PCs, from second edition, 3.5 on, because it becomes actually suddenly very cumbersome to have all those things around, right?
Yeah.
It slows down play, that's for sure.
I think the other thing that happened, and if we're going to start talking about domain play, I think
Let's talk about
I'll
domain
say,
play. Yeah.
I haven't done that much domain play because of the point in history at which I come into D&D in the late 80s, right on the tail end of first edition D&D. I think that it already started to go out of vogue with a lot of players, because I think, those rules are certainly there in first edition. They're kind of there in second edition, but I think people had kind of just bounced off of them. And then, by third edition, we're not even looking at that anymore as part of. It's not even emphasized in the player's handbook.
Yeah, it's like a
something
splat
you could
from a third party or something.
But I think part of what had happened is, by the time you get into sort of late first edition, Dragonlance had come out, and a lot of D&D novels were what were sort of stimulating people's imagination. You get into D&D and you realize, oh, there's all these Dragonlance novels, and now there's all these Forgotten Realms novels, and you aren't reading about heroes building a domain. You're reading about you're reading people emulating Tolkien, where it's a party of adventurers going on a big quest to save the world.
Right.
and that becomes sort of the expectation of what D&D campaigns are about. Is it's sort of heroes, your superheroes.
Right.
You know, your, and I don't say that to say, oh, they're overpowered. I don't mean that. I mean, that's literally, we moved to that kind of adventure story where it's not somebody building up a power base and becoming a noble or a lord or a high priest. They're just heroes who are kind of there to save the world when there's trouble.
Right. Yeah, and even like in Dark Sun, when they made Dark Sun, they had this whole elaborate world that they built up, and then the first set of novels for that world destroyed it. I mean, destroyed it. A rebellion in a major city, and then the first few adventures were just like just plot points. You know, you're going from plot point with not a lot of player agency in those plot points.
Yeah.
I mean, and it's still to this day, you know, when I hear plot point, even though Savage World uses this term a lot, their plot point mechanic is very different. You know, each plot point is a self-contained adventure, really, as opposed to plot points in an adventure that sort of linearly, you know, sets you to the next quantum ogre, right? So I think that's probably, you know, where we started losing our hair, BJ. You know, us grognards started losing. I speak for myself. But yeah, have you had any examples of domain play? You said you tried some with OSE recently.
Well, I never got to it because they weren't interested in it, and we really didn't get to that. I mean, we really didn't even get past basic level because things kind of came to a natural conclusion. But nobody was doing the kind of things that would have led towards. I mean, they recruited some hirelings and henchmen, but it just never. I think I only had one player who was thinking along the lines of where his character would be going. You know, if he could follow his ambitions in terms of building his own war band. And I think also that something that's changed is the idea that the party is the war band. You're all individual members of some kind of band of adventurers, whether you're heroes or desperados or whatever, versus the idea that I think originally everybody was kind of building their own little war band.
Mm-hmm.
You know, fighter was trying to build a company of soldiers, and a cleric might get some soldiers as well who were more like devoted warriors of the church, along with some lower level acolytes. And a wizard would try to get apprentice wizards, and same thing with like thieves and rogues. And so everybody's building their own little war band or their own little kind of retinue that then can all come together at some point if necessary. And I think we've gotten to a point of now just wanting that the individual player characters are the war band.
Right. Yeah. And I think, and if you look at some of the adventures, like if you look at Against the Giants, G1, 2, and 3, I don't know, there's some scenarios in there where you probably need your whole war band, or some encounters where you need your whole war band when you're fighting like 40 trolls, you know, in one room. I mean,
yeah,
sure, you can have the wizard let out a fireball. That takes takes out just 6 of them, you know, or so in a cluster, or 12 of them in a cluster. So, you know, you still got all those other, so you need your war bands to sustain like essentially small skirmishes as each encounter becomes more, you know, a bigger skirmish, I think.
Certainly.
Yeah, I love domain play. I've done it, I think most successfully D&D wise with the Broken Lands. I don't know if you've ever had a chance to play Broken Lands, BJ, but it was like humanoids using Gazetteer 10, the Orcs of Thar, and we had some really great. So it started. They actually started. They took like a abandoned tour. They started building up on it, and then what I loved is that they expanded. Right, so as characters kind of came up through the warband, and they domain. So it's like a bunch of city states, you know, effectively, and then some characters created their own like little domains that were allied to the original. So I thought that was going really well. And then I had like two iterations of it. And this was like the main iteration. I had another iteration of like wandering group that started somewhere else. And then they eventually came to like a big city, and we weren't going to do domain play per se, but then they hitched on, you know, sort of a faction play, like Gangs of New York style. So they had their like base of, they were at the end of it, when we kind of stopped and it's been on hiatus for a while, they had like their base of operations that they took from another faction, and now they were going to so that was kind of like a domain play but in an urban setting. And I thought that was really great how that was, you know, accumulating. And then they would they would collect, strays in a way, as a collect henchmen, like one guy in the city in the city game even had like a herald who would go and announce them, to everyone. So it was fantastic. I think it was great because it gives me the opportunity to not just like roll dice for faceless enemies, but to develop NPCs. I think that's what I like. The
Well,
domain play. I make
yeah,
leaders of various factions or various city states in the bigger scale thing, and the
mhm,
players like hobnob with them, make alliances, backstab them, whatever. I think that's kind of fun.
yeah.
It's grander in a way, but not like world ending,
Mhm.
right?
Well, and I think we've done that in a Hyperborea when we kind of played Hyperborea off and on as a backup game
Mhm.
when Pathfinder doesn't make, and that's kind of what Jeff and I have done is better it's better to make friends than enemies. We encounter people and it's always like hey, join our band,
Yeah,
come
yeah,
come 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 work on our ship.
right, right.
Um,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I think that
um,
was pretty fun that you guys actually like caused a whole ship to mutiny at one point. And now you had and then so those characters had you know, had like a group now, right? So you're on
yeah,
ship. So I thought that was kind of neat. And I like that games, these older games or these revive games based on the older editions of D&D can kind of do that. I think it lends itself
yeah,
to that. It's fun to me as a GM. It's fun to do that as a player. I'd love to explore that kind of thing, but I've had like hints of that as a player, but I've also had it where we we take the domain or we take the keep, and then the next adventure, I think the GM is tired of that storyline and it takes it away. So
yeah,
and that's not very sad. That's actually very frustrating, right? Um, so I don't know if you're gonna
yeah,
go. If you're gonna go, I guess as my advice is as a GM, if you're gonna encourage domain play, reward the players when they finally get
yeah.
that thing, right?
What's interesting to me is you can get people who don't want to play domain play instantly obsessed with domain play if you call it something else. Um, if you play the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh, it basically says whatever you do, don't give the players the ship at the end in the original module. But that's explicitly said.
Yes, I remember
Whatever you
that.
do not allow the players to obtain the ship.
Yeah, my
Um,
players take a left turn at that in the when we did the 5e version.
and I think what I did was I basically there was the ship caught on fire. It
Uh,
was sinking because, and I thought, well, I could have handled it if they'd gotten the ship, but I remember kind of reading online about do we really want to do that? Why don't you want them to have the ship? And what a comment I saw said is because when you give players in D&D or a role playing game a ship, the game now becomes a game of maintaining the ship.
it
They want
becomes
to know who their crew is. They want to upgrade the ship. They want to trade it for a better ship. That's just inherently part of a game, whether it's a sci-fi game with a spaceship or a adventure game where they've got a nautical ship. For some reason, a lot of games they don't want to do that with a home base. They don't want to do
mhm.
that with a. But for some reason, I don't know if it's because the ship can move around and go places with them. It's always kind of there, but the complexities of maintaining a ship in a role playing game with the crew and wanting to know who your crew is and who's the first mate, who's in charge when you're not there. Uh,
Yeah,
Functionally, that's no different than maintaining a manor house with a staff and
right.
who's your butler or your major domo or
Yeah.
that runs things when you're out, away on business, right?
Mhm. And that's why I kind
Uh,
of like Pathfinder. What they've always done is have like a mini game that suggests a domain play. So they've had a mini
yeah,
game. They've actually had a adventure path with a mini game for having a ship, right? The first
yeah,
the first adventure you mutiny on the ship and you take it, right? In one of the adventure paths. They have a game in PF2, the mini game in the first adventure path for PF2 is you take a keep and then you do the keep thing. They had one where you
yeah.
had a caravan and you maintain the caravan as across the spine of the world. So
Hmm.
I think it's kind of neat. And then of course Kingmaker, where which I'm running now, running Kingmaker, and we're just now getting into domain play. But the mini game is you build your domain, right?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think they're trying to bring it back, that conception, and
Yeah.
and inevitably there's going to be one player that's going to be the record keeper, the bookkeeper for all that, and loves that kind of stuff, loves a space trucking or ship trucking.
Yeah.
Incidentally, since you brought up Ghost of Saltmarsh, like one of my players was a druid, and when he met a certain species on board the ship, he's like, I'm not going to fight these because these are like not my people, but they're like they believe what I believe, So he didn't fight
Yeah.
them, and then negotiated with them and said, these people are bad. Why are you dealing with them? Deal with us. And
Yeah.
things changed.
Which is interesting if it's what I'm thinking you're talking about. That actually is what needs to happen to lead into the second part of the trilogy.
Which gives an end to the second part of the trilogy. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, we should have said spoiler alert, but it was
Yeah.
vague enough. I think another. Go ahead.
Well,
You're probably going to talk about Traveler, right?
You're with Traveler, I mean, that's what we are doing, and we have one player who really enjoys doing that, and I'm happy that he's doing that because I would do it if it needed to be done. But
these people really, but two of the players actually. One looks at all the trade, space trucking type stuff, and one looks at all the, ship construction type stuff. So
But we in our last session, the approach I've got my character taking is constantly trying to meet people.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're handling a lot of the bookkeeping and stuff. He's kind of the pilot of the ship and kind of a swashbuckler kind of character. So the way I try to play him is he just sort of, it seems like he's along for the ride, but he's also trying to meet people at this point to it could give us jobs or be a potential contact in the future if we need help. Which to me is part of the domain play as well, is right. Making allies, mm-hmm. which if everybody's doing a domain, that's kind of what you do is you've got, say, your typical D&D party where the fighter builds a castle and they become the baron, but within their domain or neighboring their domain, maybe the cleric establishes a new temple and becomes the head priest of the temple, and the wizard builds a tower.
And then the rogue has a guild, like a thieves guild, doing all the stuff, or a spy network doing all the.
And so they've got their own little domains that kind of weave together in kind of a meta domain where the party members can still do stuff. The adventures become bigger, and they still go off and adventure together, but they're trying to do higher level stuff. I think you get that in Traveler too, where we're trying to maintain the different aspects of this sort of freelance shipping group, where we take jobs and you move cargo and you take on passengers and you go on scouting expeditions. One traveler party can do that with either one ship or with sort of a fleet of a couple of 3 ships. Mm-hmm. Doing all the accounting becomes interesting because it's how you. To me, that's part of what kind of cannons do we put on the ship? What kind of shields do we put on the ship? What kind of speed do we put on the ship? That's gets back into what's the payoff with our war band? We've got so many pikemen, so many archers. What are we going to armor them with? Well, the more we equip them with, the slower they're going to go on the march when we need to mobilize them. It gets back to that. But if you don't want to get into that domain play or those war game roots of role playing game, I get that can get really tedious for people who just kind of want to show up and punch bad guys and throw fireballs at stuff, which is a perfectly fun way to play. I enjoy it too, but sometimes you want something a little different.
I think for me, since I'm a GM who likes story, that type of like what you had said earlier before while we were working on how we're going to approach this topic, the ongoing war game, right? So it's the ongoing strategy that the players are coming together, whatever game it might be. And in Traveler, I think so originally too, right? So Traveler, classic Traveler, there's no XP, there's no way to increase the ability of your character except through this long process of training, right? So I mean, in Mongoose Traveler, there is a supplemental optional rule that you can, and I think to keep some players motivated, that becomes getting better is part of that motivation. But originally, it's just accumulation of wealth. Accumulation of influence, meeting friends and accumulating allies, defeating enemies or that get in your way, right? So that becomes the
Yeah.
motivation, making a name for yourself in your part of space, that becomes the motivation and the domain play, as it were, right?
Hmm.
So I think I feel like I mean, you can comment on it now or on your own podcast, but I think I've done a good job of managing that. I feel like I've given enough motivation for people to make for an interesting campaign, especially now that you guys are hobnobbing with or in the same circle almost as movers and shakers in your domain, right? In your
Yeah. Yeah. And there, there's been a variety. We've had a variety of adventures with different flavors, and we've kind of built up a reputation. We've got a ship, and we have those resources. We got a crew, and that's one of the things we talk about. Okay, well, if we're going to go over here, the crew is going to move the ship without us to the next destination. And do we have somebody who can fill all the functions?
right.
Do we have an engineer? Do we have a capable pilot so that
How do you improve your crew, right? That
they,
becomes
they don't
another.
misjump? They don't misjump to the wrong sector and are lost forever.
Yeah,
with all our stuff.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that unless it became like a part of like an adventure, right? It's just kind of
Right.
like a gotcha, but that's not necessary unless there's like some odd reason. Although there could be hints of that, with one of your ships being haunted, but that's the next
Yeah.
adventure. So I
Right.
think another game that's like that too that I've had a good fun with domain play, but again, it's like two different like different motivations, right? There's some players who really get into the strategy and the planning and want to build something in a post-apocalyptic world, the Twilight 2000, and there's some who really have expressed, I don't know if it's frustration, but and not really complaint because they still play, but oh my gosh, we have so many stragglers and there's so many people to take care of. But I think that was one of the original when I'm reading through the original incarnation of Twilight 2000, that is the process. You start out as like nothing, you accumulate allies, and then you get to something big that changes your area. And I think some
Yeah.
players love that and recognize that and are always thinking of solutions on how to do that. Um, and some players would just rather have, the like a D&D style. We got 4 player characters, so we got 4 players. We got 4 players, we got 4 player characters, and we just kind of wander around and exploration it. But
Yeah.
I don't know. I think for me, again, that's cool. I could do that if that's what the players want. But you know, us but I like making NPCs. I like playing NPCs. I like,
Hmm.
doing that as well. I like getting into that. What's the bigger picture type of thing.
Yeah. And I think that probably there's ways to do that. Thinking about, you um, I guess I've been thinking a lot about the way D&D started, the stuff that I missed because of when I got into the hobby, and it kind of come and gone. And I've recently read Muster, the Pink Phantom, on his podcast has been doing that. And
Right.
is it Hexpress has been doing a live? Is that who the
Yeah,
video?
Todd from Hexpress.
Todd Hexpress. It's a really good book. It talks about sort of approaching D&D or similar games from a wargaming mindset. Probably not in the way you think, but it really is about having multiple characters and the domain play and managing your building of a war band,
Mm-hmm.
and thinking of yourself as that's what we, even when it's just the player characters, we're a commando unit who goes into difficult places, right?
Yeah.
But eventually the operation grows because we get henchmen and hirelings and more resources. Between that and then looking at Dragons Beyond, which went up a couple weeks ago on Drive Through, and then Jason Carley and I are going to actually interview the guy tomorrow, and we'll have an episode of it'll be Jason's podcast, but I'll be on there with him talking about how he's gone back and found some of the original kind of playtest rules from the early 70s, and published a version of that didn't has the stuff that got cut from original D&D, which a lot of it is about domain play and stuff like that. So I won't get in too far to that because I don't want to spoil that episode of Jason's podcast. But I think in thinking about just the way D&D used to be played, people know this from his kids talking about it, and his his friends and business partners talking about. It's kind of like Gary was running D&D at the house most days of the week, and whoever could show up showed up and played, and they could do that because they had all these domains and they had different characters, a stable of characters and hirelings and henchmen, and you could always just cobble together something
Right.
based on the way they used
And
to
that's
play.
the great thing about domain play, because like in Broken Lands, right, you'd have the guy who was further advanced up and was maybe the leader of a political group, but then he had other characters and like, I don't know if I want to get into the big picture. Let's just do like a little adventure. Everyone makes like other characters and they have like the low level.
Yeah.
So yeah,
so you could do that when you've got a guy who's like, anybody in the neighborhood can show up and play D&D.
Yeah.
It's an open table. It's hard to do that anymore. That's just not the way we do things for a lot of reasons. The interesting thing is the internet and social media has gotten us to a place where we can kind of do it again virtually.
Right.
If assuming someone has the time. And I guess what made me think about that is you said you enjoy as a DM playing the NPCs and role playing out that stuff. And it's like, well, you can kind of do that now if everybody agrees that not everybody has to be at every session. This is the topic of this session, and everybody who's interested in doing this part can show up. And if you're not, don't worry about it. If you're more in for the when are we finally going to kind of go out and kick in doors and fight enemies, that'll be on Thursday. And the Tuesday session is kind of all the prep for that. That's interacting with NPCs. That's acquiring resources. That's put things in order so that the party can go with the next adventure and do that.
Right.
But I think we've gotten to this idea that session 1 goes to session 2, goes to session 3, and those are just episode 1, episode 2, episode 3, episode 4. And so if you're not there, either your character just sort of fades away or somebody runs them as an NPC for the session, because one event leads to the next, leads to the next. It's an ongoing, unfolding story. We don't have to do that anymore. And particularly if you can kind of do asymmetrical by play by post or sorting things out by email or like on a Discord server or in a Facebook group, you can handle some of those, even a little bit of the role playing, okay, so I go talk to an important NPC. Well, then, you can just have that conversation as text messages between the DM and the player if you want to set aside the time to do it. And then it's not you don't got somebody who has no interest in that sitting over there kind of playing on their phone waiting for the action, right?
Right.
So it seems like we used to be able to do that way back when, and that's fallen out of vogue, but there may be a way to get back to doing that with a lot of the social media tools and online tools that you had that gap kind of in the 80s, 90s, and early aughts where we couldn't do that.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, now we can, I think, with all the platforms we have available. It just, kind of puts it on the GM to organize that type of, game. I would like to say that, your commando analogy was interesting because, that first lieutenant, when he's a commando, leading that first or second raid, eventually becomes, a colonel and has like a company, or I guess it would be a battalion at that point, so, they move up, right? We move up. So yeah, I think, I guess we wanted to talk about with great power comes great responsibility, whether it's wealth or accumulation of stuff or influence. And we want to talk about a couple abuse stories to close it out and then conclude. So I know you have and we bandied these about on various podcasts, but it'd be fun to just kind of tell the story. So Go ahead, BJ.
I don't know if I've seen a players abuse their power in domain play, but I do have a funny one. It was a 3rd edition Eberron game where the DM gave us we kind of broke the game. The DM gave us put us on. It was a time travel mission, and so we went back to a period earlier in Eberron's history for one adventure, and this is my fault. It's what happens when a bunch of 20-somethings pull in a 30-year-old who knows a little more about how the world works into their game back then. But I said, wait a minute, where are we? At what point in the Eberron timeline are we? And the DM explained to it, and I'm like, so he's like, it was because we were going to get on the lightning rail, and he said, well, there's no lightning rail, it hasn't been built yet. And I said, it hasn't been built yet, and so he kind of, well, they're building it. Okay, it's just sort of this new concept, yeah. And I'm like, well, what other things are like that right now? And so he came up with some sort of things, and so it's almost like if we could go back to the early part of the 20th century and buy stock in Coca-Cola, General Motors, General Electric, or go back to the 70s and buy stock in Apple or IBM. It was that sort of, it was Biff Tannen from Back to the Future, right?
Oh, right. Yeah.
So I said, well, let's buy because it's Eberron. They have banks. You know, at that point, even there's banking and there's stuff. And I'm like, well, let's we've got a lot of money with us because we've got treasure on us. Let's invest in the lightning rail and in the I can't remember what other we identified, like a portfolio of things.
Yeah.
I was like, okay, cool. So then we get back at the end of that adventure back to the kind of the present day, and I'm like, okay, how much money do we have? And so he's like trying to figure it out, and I'm like, well, you got to compound that interest, and you got to.
So mean.
He was like, screw it, you guys have enough money to obtain anything you absolutely want. That's the only logical.
But what becomes the motivation at that point?
Yeah. Well, it was keep playing D&D because we liked our characters, right?
Yeah.
And we had, like, again, heroic things to accomplish with threats to the world and threats to the continent. So it didn't really kill the campaign in terms of let's just retire and enjoy ourselves. But it did sort of, any resource we want, we can now obtain. And now he's got to rethink how to make things challenging for us, right?
Right.
That he wasn't planning on. So he was a good sport about it. It was really funny, but it kind of, there was a could have broken the game if we hadn't been a little more flexible and understanding. But that goes back to, I think, one of the points I made in my call into Jason originally was, if you're not going into domain play, or even if, and not everybody's interested in domain. You got to think not every adventure in a D&D world is interested in a domain.
Yeah.
That they, at some point, maybe you start off even wanting that, and after your 10th or 12th scrape with death, you got a little bit of PTSD going, and you're looking on enough gold to live pretty comfortably for the rest of your life. The desire to keep going out and risking your life just to get more money or chasing thrills was going to go away for some people.
Right.
Now you can say, PCs, adventurers are a different breed, and that's perfectly fine. And I think that's the answer for most people. But what I came up with and what I commented on Discord was that would be a good explanation of why, you've got 4th to 5th level NPCs scattered all over in every town and settlement.
Right.
That aren't going out and doing this stuff that your 2nd and 1st level characters are going to do. Because, hey, I made my money. I'm done risking my life. You go do it.
True.
Because, like if you look at, I think somebody said, if you look at Keep on the Borderlands, even if you marshaled every monster in the Caves of Chaos into a force, the forces in the keep would obliterate them easily. So you kind of have to ignore the fact that, well, are these really a threat to anything? And I think with Keep on the Borderlands, the idea is, you're going out trying to. There's no plot. There's no imminent threat. They're just kind of there.
Yeah.
And you're going out to raid and take gold and have some adventures.
Right.
But if you wanted to sort of think about, well, how tolerant would the Castellan of a kingdom be with all those monsters just kind of there? Because it tells you, they're kind of drawn to chaos, and there's a shrine of chaos, and so something's going to happen eventually, right?
Right.
But if they did, I mean, if they were really kind of a problem, if you just list out all the forces available in the keep versus the monsters, including the more powerful ones, the keep would just an assault on the keep would be futile, and the keep could march out of force and just completely devastate the monsters.
I mean, that could be like an adventure there, right? Like, go check out this keep and see if it's a threat. If it's a threat, well, convince us to go out there and do this, obliterate it. Or whatever.
I can't remember what level fighter the Castellan is, but the Castellan and all of his advisors have they're not only like good level fighters, but they all have like magic armor and magic
Mhm.
weapons
Yeah, yeah.
and and I think that's probably there to ensure that your players don't just take over the keep, or if they do, that it's a challenge if they decide that's what they want to do.
Right. Right.
But anyway, just that sidetrack. That another point I'd said, motivating to adventure is you got to come up with a way, a reason. Either you're one of those people who no, it's never enough adventure. You're going to keep going because there's just something that an itch you can't scratch.
Yeah.
Or you do aspire to something really high and powerful, and
Or,
that's the only way to do it.
yeah. Or something nefarious, because I can tell my Pendragon story. Because maybe that was
Yeah.
the motivation of one particular brother against another.
Yeah.
So I've told this.
The other thing that's fun for, and I'll let you tell that. The one last thought on that is I did have a thought the other day about a point I'd made on Discord was, depending on how you roll your gold in BX, it says if you want to hire a peasant as just sort of, to tend your camp or carry stuff, it's not a fighter, a mercenary or anything. It's a gold piece a month. Well, depending on how well you roll your starting gold and what equipment you need, you might be walking around with more than a peasant makes in a year as a first level 0 XP newly minted adventurer. So you're already kind of up there, and very quickly you started to accumulate that amount of money. But it made me think of, again, adventuring like logical consequences.
Right.
So you're building your war band, and you start going, well, they can't all be mercenaries. We need cooks, and we need seamstresses, and we need
Someone to fix a wagon wheel when it breaks.
someone to fax. So someone to groom the horses and whatever. So okay, we'll start hiring some of these peasants. They're just a gold piece a month. I mean, that's how many peasants can you hire before the local lord is like, why is nobody out?
Work in the
Why
field.
are the fields not tilled? Why are the fields not
That's
tilled
probably
to
true.
plant crops? Why has no one gathered any firewood?
Yeah, you'd have to make it like post Black Plague, so serfdom is broken.
Yeah. Well, or either that's the key to the domain is you start hiring all these peasants away, and the landlord comes after you. And
yeah.
Kill him and take his castle.
Right. Yeah. That's funny. Yeah. So the great Pendragon story, not the great Pendragon campaign, but so one player, and actually I have to preface, I did talk to him about it. I saw him over the holidays. The player whose other players assassinated basically, and he's still bitter about it. In fact, he hasn't really gained much since then. So what happened was like he really engaged with the idea of domain play, and he even like courted, like there's rules for courtly love, and he courted a rich widow, got accumulated some towers, started building them into castles and stuff through the courses of some winter phases. And some of the players just, I guess, didn't like it. So what they did is they conspired with a bad guy in a, sort of a mini campaign I was running, and unbeknownst to me, like one of the other players was a vassal of this lord, and was conspiring with the enemy. And I think the last straw was like the lord held this tournament, and I think the other player, since it's me, it's us against just him and maybe one other player character, we'll beat him. We're going to run the table. But he actually, I guess maybe not, what's the word where you don't do what's normal? Maybe a bit out of character, a bit with a lack of etiquette. Since he saw that some of his people, some of his head knights were losing, he got on the horse and fought and started defeating other player characters. I mean, it's a dice, right? It's dice, right? He was sure he was better, but some were comparable, and he just I think that was the last straw. So they conspired to assassinate him when he was being attacked by one of the enemy, his own vassal. Like I said, unbeknownst to me, had conspired with the player's brother, actually. And I guess they were good friends, these two guys, and then stabbed him in the back while he was being attacked by enemy. So
and not the character's brother, the player's brother, who was also a player in the game, right?
Yes. Yeah, there was no one like drew a knife to the table and stabbed anyone. So, you know, it,
Yeah.
it was interesting. We were all in our, you know, we're all in our 20s, you know, like you said, and you know before, but
It's kind of one of those things where you need to know PvP is on the table or not. That's kind of a session
true.
zero.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I don't
Mm.
know. I guess it wasn't really implied, but maybe so. Like, while one motivation for one player was in the same game was power and wealth and you know influence, the others was to like break that power. That was their
Yeah.
sole motivation because those guys didn't really play after that. And then the campaign itself had wanted to run the Great Pendragon campaign, and a couple other players played a little bit more after that, but the group as a whole never really got together again. So
Mhm.
I guess that's the conclusion to that sordid Pendragon story. Um,
Yeah.
it's fun to talk about.
It brings up an interesting question, and I think that's something I kind of, as I was looking in, again, kind of a preview to maybe some conversations Jason or I are going to have on his show. Um, in Dragons Beyond, they talk about when you create a first level character, kind of one. It's almost kind of the assumption that they are a apprentice, a vassal, a man at arms
Hmm.
to an established character. So the domain play is already there. You just start off as a
They do
somebody
that. They did that in
as a
some.
member of someone else's
Yeah.
domain, and it really kind of talks about the
Hmm.
dungeon master can create a non-player character for you to be that's your liege lord, or you could just be a vassal of or a man at arms or an apprentice to somebody else's character. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And you're talking about that there, where this one character is a vassal of another character's uh,
Yeah.
another player's character. I think that kind of maybe trounces on kind of our current thinking of
Hmm.
player agency
Right.
and no PvP, and we're all kind of equals in this. And you know, you can always role play a military campaign or like Star Trek or someone where someone's a ship captain or but I think that most people don't play that as in, well, whoever's playing the captain or the lieutenant is kind of the rest of us have to do what they say. I think you step out of the game, you come up with a strategy, and then you utilize that player then goes and utilizes their character's skills as an officer to execute the plan.
Right.
Um,
Yeah. I think of when one player started lording over other players, that player's character would quickly be fragged, and maybe that's what
yeah,
happened in this situation.
yeah, but thinking about how you know, you'd be interested to know how they did that back then to how did they avoid those sorts of things, or were they okay with that kind of stuff because they were all kind of it was kind of one foot in the wargaming world where this isn't
True.
exactly a cooperative game the way we
Right.
think of it now.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, even some other early, like I don't know if base D&D did that. I can't think. I think it was more everyone for themselves. But I know in the Oriental Adventures and in the Al Qadim books, they did have that you're a vassal. You could be many of the player characters were vassals of some NPC
Yeah,
starting out.
and being of an NPC is one thing, but actually having to be the you know the servant or lackey of another player, unless you want to do that. I mean, everybody says that'd be kind of fun. We know how to do it and have fun with it, but
Yeah,
to sort of say that that's sort of well, hey man, if you want to join our campaign as a new
you got to
player,
be
you know your first level character, Bob is your boss.
right. Yeah, that'd be kind of a hard sell, I think. I know that in my kind of Finnish Star Wars Edge of Empire campaign, the player characters had accumulated so much experience and wealth they wanted to retire, but they wanted to continue playing Star Wars, and they were just going to make new characters that were, you know, servants and lackeys of the new syndicate that the player
Mm-hmm.
characters had created, which I think that's probably okay because again that becomes like an NPC and not really another player character, right? So
And I think that's more traditionally what people have done in D&D is they wind
mhm,
up from
retiring,
their favorite henchman becomes their new player character,
right?
or they
Yeah.
just make a new player character and say this is the you
Mhm.
know a member of my old character's household.
Right. Yeah. So I think we've covered a lot. I don't know if we've answered the question of what motivates you, the player, to adventure, but
Mm-hmm.
I would say I'll conclude and then you can have the last word, BJ. I would say, you know, some players are there for story. We've kind of discussed that, how they the evolution of second edition onward, where stories became more the focus as opposed to accumulation of gold. But some players still want power and wealth, engage in the domain play, like accumulating a lot of gold and buying stuff and or getting more equipment, improving their equipment. But some players, they're just there as, not bystanders, because they definitely participate when they're there and they are engaged, but they just there for the camaraderie. They're like that character actor that you see in every single, action film or Western. They're there, they're important, but you know what? They're not there for the story. The story happens. They're not there for power and wealth. They're just there to drink beer and have some pretzels.
Yep. I think the challenge is when you've got people who want different things, is there a way to create a campaign that can accommodate all that? And I think it can be done, but you have to think about it a little bit and know, okay, if a player doesn't enjoy the domain play or the bookkeeping or the accounting, find a way to where they don't have to do it.
Right.
But the character that really likes doing it can. And that's okay. Whether that's, hey man, I can see you don't like this part of the stuff. If you don't care, I'll just do it for you as the GM. Or maybe somebody else will, do it for you. But
Right.
it just doesn't apply to your character. Your character is kind of just wandering through life as a freebooter. And your buddies are settling down and getting married and having kids, and then you got to go knock on the door and sneak them out to go raid a dungeon every now and then, right?
You're Jack Reacher wandering the land. Yeah.
Dispensing justice with your giant muscles.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
I
think that's a great idea.
Is Jack Reacher the modern day Conan?
I don't know. That dude's big. That was Art Richardson. What's Keith Richardson? I can't remember.
Alan Richardson.
Alan Richardson.
Yeah,
that guy's huge.
And that's the way the character's written in the books. He's not Tom Cruise. He's a big strapping.
He's a big dude. He's like the Swede from the movie with Clint Eastwood, Heartbreak Ridge. Yeah. So yeah,
I understand there's actually one Reacher novel where he gets shot in the chest and he survives, and the comment is actually you survive because of your big pecs. And if someone with smaller pecs, the bullet would have traveled farther into their chest.
Wow. I don't know.
Which I guess is physically possible, but
man. Yeah, I know Session Zero can be a dirty word sometimes, but I think that's a great point, BJ, because I think at the beginning of proposing a campaign, even before Session Zero, you probably want to ask potential player characters, what do you want to get out of this campaign? And then the GM is more informed. I mean, I'm not saying give him like 20 questions or a questionnaire, although some games do that. But like, what do you want to get out of this campaign? How can I help you to enjoy the game? And hopefully they will answer that, because some people will just say, well, I don't care. So that's also could be an issue. But yeah, I think and there's no bad way to play. There's no bad motivation. I mean, I guess people could say there's some motivations that are not conducive to group play. But I think, what motivates you? I guess that's the question, the player to adventure. All right.
Well, thousands of players and probably thousands of answers.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Well, thank you so much, BJ, for joining me. This has been the GMologist Presents. You can give us feedback. That would be great. You can send feedback to myself at gmologist@gmail.com, or to BJ if you don't want to send me I don't know, because I'm mean or something. You don't want to send me it. BJ is a lot nicer than me, being from Oklahoma as opposed to Texas. So where can they reach you, BJ?
You can find me on Audio Dungeon Discord or arcane.alienist@gmail.com. I'd also say, you can always listen to my podcast too.
Oh, for sure.
Keep an eye on the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. I'll be guesting on there soon, and be sure and check out YouTube, the GM Engine Awesome YouTube, where I'm on there, not on every time, but it's because it's Carl's YouTube channel, but he's always joined by either me or Amy or both of us and some other people for playing different games and looking at different topics. So.
Yeah, cool. You can also send me an email or a voice message at SpeakPipe. I have a SpeakPipe account linked in the show notes. And you can also try to send me through the Anchor app, whatever it's called now. No, Spotify for Podcasters app. I still get them. It's not as efficient. You only have a minute. So it's best, your best bet is to leave us a message, like as a voice recorded message, and then put it on the Discord. But I would like to thank the World of M.W. Lewis, WebDM, Bandits Keep, the Pink Phantom, Hex Press, and of course, Nerds RPG Variety Cast for all the inspiration for this topic. Thank you so much. Good night and good rolling.